all areas of human knowledge have their own language. And once you learn that language, you begin to understand what that area really has to offer. This applies to finance, to health, to car mechanics, and to web development as well, and IT in general. So I'm going to go through some basic concepts that will help you navigate throughout this course and through having to deal with IT professionals, or if you want to get started with your own IT projects and build your website or your app. This, I think, will be a good starting point. Let's begin by the very basics. What is the internet? Well, for some people, that's a place where they share photos, they share their LOL cats, documents. But if we go a bit more strict to what the definition is, the internet is actually a bunch of computers spread all around the world that talk to each other using a certain protocol, a certain language that's called TCP/IP. It's not a language, but that's what they use to communicate to each other. And from the internet, the World Wide Web came out, which is a network of hypertext documents that are linked to each other, what we know as web pages, websites. In 1990, the first web browser came out. It was called www, and it's what you see on the screen. So you need what's called a web browser to open websites, and websites are made in a language called HTML. So the web today has gone quite far from that early beginnings, and we have all sorts of things now, like social networks and multimedia, messaging, documents, and everything you can think of. But the basics remain kind of the same in terms of this model. So there's a client, which is your computer, your web browser, that makes a request to the cloud, to the server, and it receives from the server a response. When you go to Facebook, you're making a request to the Facebook server, you're asking for the Facebook page, and the server sends you back a response which contains the files, like the actual HTML file, the CSS files, and the images of that Facebook page, and then you enter your login. That gets sent again to the server and another request, and if your login is correct, you get a response back, and that's the page that shows your friends and all of the other stuff. If your password is wrong, then you get a response that says your password is wrong. So this basic interaction is a core element of web development, and I want you to keep this in mind. The client is your web browser. We have many web browsers out there. And something important to keep in mind as well is that we live in a post-PC world, in a post-computer world, where computers are not the only device that you can use to access the internet. There's phones, tablets, TVs, refrigerators, and more devices are now capable of connecting to the internet. The client usually is what the user sees, the presentation. So you get the Facebook page, right? You see the photos of your friends, their status, but that's not the actual data. It's just what's been sent to you. But they have the data is saved in a database in the server. So, and the client also receives the user input and sends that to the server. The languages used on the client side, the technologies used, are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML and CSS have to do with mostly with appearance. So HTML is just the structure and the content, and then that content becomes pretty with CSS. CSS takes care of font families, font types, layouts, colors, sizes of the fonts, of the elements, alignments, and a whole bunch of other stuff. JavaScript takes care of interactivity. It adds logic to your web page, so and it's more and more common that there's more and more logic on the client side, and JavaScript is used for that. On the server, on the other hand, a server is basically a computer in a data center. That's what it is. A computer which could be like a grid of many computers connected to each other, but it's the simplest way to see it, it's a computer located somewhere in the world, most likely in a data center. When we talk about the cloud, we're usually talking about, I mean, we're always talking about some servers, some computers located somewhere in the world that are keeping my files and my photos and my information. Servers have databases where they keep information, and they also take care of the business logic, um, data validation. So if I send my user and password to the server, it gets checked against the database. Does this user exist? Is this user's password the one that they sent? Is that correct? That checking is done on the server side. There are many different languages used on the server side. There's PHP, Java, Python, Ruby, JavaScript that I mentioned earlier is also used as a server-side language, and there's a bunch more server alternatives. Some things that are done in the server. So when you talk to your developer or when you're planning your project, you always need to think which things are going to be done in the client and in the server. So everything that has to do with you creating data, storing data, saving data, updating, deleting data, that's all really happening on the server. You, as a client in your web browser, you get the view that shows you a table of elements and a delete button in each one of them, but the actual data is stored in the cloud, in the server. So everything that has to do with logging and logout as well is done against server-side checks. And saving files, saving photos, saving documents, that's all sent to the server, and that's where it's stored. And when I say server, it could be like many different servers for one web application. So sometimes it could have the database in one server and then the files in a different server, and then connect to each other, but that's behind the scenes for you. I don't want you to leave this course without knowing without knowing anything about HTML5. HTML5 is the latest specifications of HTML, and it takes HTML to a whole new level where there's much more interactivity, much more behavior, integration with some of your device's native features like camera. And if you learn HTML5 all the way, you can make not only websites but also all sorts of apps, mobile apps, TV apps, or any apps for any device that supports HTML5, and also games. You can make mobile games or desktop games, and you can also make like Windows programs or Mac programs or desktop computer applications. You can make those too. And well, we're not covering this in this course. It's sort of a building that I've made. At the bottom, you have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the core sort of web technologies for the client. On top of that, you build on the newer HTML5 specs, on CSS3, which is a newer CSS that has animations and a bunch of other stuff. JavaScript APIs that allow you to connect to the GPS of your device, to camera. And then there are more libraries that you can learn that will help you, like jQuery that helps you manipulate what's going on the page. That's a really simple way of putting it. jQuery Mobile, it allows you to create like the mobile version of the page so that it will render in all sorts of mobile phones, even old ones. And then you need some sort of cloud or some sort of server side. You can build your own server side, or you can use existing backend called backend as a service. And on top, and when you've reached that point, you can actually build apps that are for many platforms: iOS, Android, Windows Mobile, BlackBerry. And we have another course by Zemba, which goes through this entire building all the way to the top, from the beginning all the way to the top, which I recommend you check out as well, especially when you finish this course and you get a good grasp of HTML and CSS. That's called iOS and Android HTML5 apps for beginners. And now we're all good to get started with the basics of HTML.